Welcome back to Other Duties as Assigned. It's season 5, it's episode 2, and we're diving into culture. We kind of started talking culture a lot in episode 1, but we're going to get a little bit more into the details of culture and how that, as you build culture, that culture really lives in the details. And not everybody has to be a detail person. That doesn't have to be your thing. But I will tell you that details matter. And it's something I'm passionate about. It's something that is really meaningful to me. You don't build culture through words you write on the wall or emails you send. Culture really comes in those daily interactions with students and staff and your team, and just talking a language that everybody can kind of get behind. And so I think that's really important, and not just talking it, but living it. And so I think that's where we have to live. When we think about, I'm going to start focusing with the hallways and what's going on in your building. What really impacts culture is if you start to look at what are we enforcing, what are we ignoring, and what are we enforcing inconsistently. I think if you look at those kind of 3 categories of what's going on in your building, that matters. You have to have things that are non-negotiables, and you have to hold true to them. If you don't, you're going to start to see things waver. Kids don't know what the rules are. They don't know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Language is a big one for me. What are we going to enforce? If I hear language, I'm going to enforce that 100 times out of 100. I'm going to address it. I'm going to make sure that we understand what the expectation is and understand that concept of time and place. Same goes with just how we interact, how we behave in the hallways. It's not uncommon to see me, my arm around a freshman, early in the fall and say, look around. What do you see the rest of these kids do? Do you see them running around? Do you see them playing tag in the hallways? And that's not how we act. And so really trying to get into those interactions to really reinforce this isn't what we do. Just hollering at them, just, helping them, though, understand what we do and why we do it. And the other part is, if you're inconsistent, you might as well not doing it at all. Because that consistency breeds an understanding of what we do and what we don't do. I would add to that, just thinking about that consistency piece is, if there's a rule you're not going to enforce on a regular basis, why is it a rule? Why is it an expectation more so than a rule that you're gonna ask people to do something? You better ask everybody to do it. You better ask them to do it every day. That's important. One piece of that, is interesting. People talk about dress code. It always seems to come up. I was talking with some students today. We were at our principal advisory council meeting. We were digging into the handbook. Just wanted to get their input, their feedback about what they think about our handbook and any changes that they would, or anything that needs clarified. And we talked about dress code a little bit. And somebody said, we don't have a dress code. I said, we absolutely have a dress code. The dress code is, I shouldn't walk down the hall and see somebody and go, oh my gosh, what are you wearing? And I think that's the theory. That's the standard. We have a lot more words than that, but that's the standard. And it's easy to, when you know it when you see it, as the Supreme Court once said. And I think, trying to have that clarity and that consistency in how you do things is really important. As a building leader, you have to set the tone for that. There's a lot of different adults in the building. There's a lot of different standards for what that is, but you help the people around you understand what we're going to enforce and how we're going to enforce it. And I think one of the things that helped us is, we don't ask teachers to enforce dress code. We say, hey, listen, if you see a dress code violation, let us know. We'll follow up. We'll enforce it. We'll make those decisions. We'll have those conversations. It's hard to have a dress code conversation in a classroom with 30 kids. But if they shoot us an email or a text message, we'll catch the kid, right away, pull them aside, have a one-on-one conversation, and that helps keep the teachers out of it and allows us for that consistency piece to really come through. I think that the clarity piece is really important. Just making sure people know what the expectation is. fashion changes. I am not a fashionista by any stretch, but I know fashion changes, and so having a dress code that is this, or bare arms, or no bare arms, or shorts that are this long, or whatever, that's hard to, because fashion changes. And so what we try to do is just try to hold people accountable for being professional. We don't wear hats and hoods. Why? Because that's not what professionals do. That's not how we go about being a professional learner. And we try to use that language too to make it a positive so people understand what we do. I also think about how you have that conversation, and the tone is really important. We're really cautious of having those conversations one-on-one, and doing it in a way that the kid doesn't feel targeted or singled out or called out in front of their friends. I think that's really important. I think, one of the things, if you dig in here, and we're talking a little more about hallways, is if you think about what you see in the hallways, you see, what's the culture of your building. I love seeing our kids, going from point to, class to class, talking to their friends, enjoying, smiling, not looking at their cell phones, all those things. They're just enjoying being around the people that they go to school with and catching up. And I think that's really important. We want, if there's something that needs addressed in the hallway, again, we do it from a place of teaching and coaching and getting them to be better. But if it's if it's consistently they're not on board with what we're asking, then we'll have farther conversations. We'll send kids to the office and we'll have those conversations down there. Inconveniencing a student on their way to class because they're not following directions, I'm perfectly fine with. We're going to get that behavior fixed first so that we can then do the learning, because we're going to be professional. We're going to handle ourselves, kind of our way in the hallway. Part of that too is you got to be there. You got to be in the hallway. You can't be sitting at your desk typing up emails or creating documents or on the phone or all the things. There's a time and a place for that. But the passing periods, the before schools, the after schools, man, that's the time to be in the hallway. And I think it's really important to get out and be seen and to see and talk to kids and see what's going on, address kids by name, ask them how the concert was on Friday, or hey, wish them luck for a game or a match coming up that night. I think that stuff is really meaningful, and teachers matter too, in that regard. They want to see you out and about. And I try to work not just in kind of common areas, which is easy to do. I do that probably too often. If I was giving myself a critique, I'd say, hey, listen, you need to get up and down the hallways more than just kind of being in the common spaces, by the front door, in our kind of major commons area. And I think that's be critical of yourself, help yourself get better. And I think that's an area, but being present, being out and about, man, it prevents problems. If a kid or a teacher sees a problem and you're there, they'll let you know. But just being there, walking around, being in the areas definitely helps to do that. And it helps build those culture moments. And you do it 5 minutes at a time, checking on a teacher, say, hey, you've been out a couple of days. How are you feeling? Or, hey, what's going on with this? Making some quick touch points and check-ins, I think, are really, really meaningful. I think the thing that when we think about kids, they want you to be predictable. It's like anything. And so as you do that culture, I want to be the same guy every day, whether I'm tired or had a great night's sleep, whether I've had 2 cups of coffee or 0 cups of coffee, whether I've had a bad, parent just, giving me a hard time on the telephone or just the best news ever. I want to be the same person. The Indiana Hoosiers just won a national championship. And I heard an interview with Kurt Signetti, their head coach, and they were asking him, hey, Coach, why don't you ever smile? You don't ever get excited and fired up on the sideline. He said, well, I ask my players to stay even keeled, to be ready to play the next play and not to worry about what just happened and get caught up in those emotions, but to be, and he's like, if I'm going to ask them to do it, I'm going to do the same thing. And that's what I try to do too, as an administrator, as an adult in a child's life. I want to be predictable. I want to be consistent. And I want them to know that I'm going to always be there. And I think that's something that for a lot of kids, they really, really latch onto, and they really enjoy that piece of it. What I would tell you is, if you're like us, you got a handbook that's this thick, You can't enforce every rule all day long, but what you do is you enforce what matters, you be consistent, you hold kids accountable for being professionals and coming about school in the right way, knowing that there's a time and a place for how you do things. And there's nothing in that handbook. There's no one rule that you can have that's going to change everything. But it's about you being there and being consistent for your students in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the cafeteria, at sporting events, but being and you know at concerts, whatever. But it's being consistent and showing up and reinforcing those behaviors that you want to see. That's how you get kids to buy in and help them understand what the expectations are. I think that's a day in, day out. For us, it's a 180-day thing. We want to do school one day at a time, and we want those days of school to be really consistent for kids. So, I hope you think about that next time the bell rings and you get a chance to step out in the hallway to see a passing period, or kids coming to school, or in the cafeteria, or at recess if you're an elementary school teacher or administrator. Just thinking about how can I be there and show up for kids consistently, and how can I be really clear about what my expectations are. I think that's really important. So I appreciate you tuning in to Other Duties as Assigned. We'll continue to move forward with these topics kind of related to culture and building that morale and building that vision in your school over the next few episodes. I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.